Okay, my presentation today is the Industrial Heritage Tourism. First, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Philip, and my last name Xie is Xie, and I'm currently a professor of tourism, recreation, and event planning programs at the School of Human Movement, Sports and Leisure Studies at Bowling Green State University. And I did my PhD in urban and regional planning at the University of Waterloo in Canada, Ontario, and I came to Bowling Green in 2001 and specialized in the cultural heritage tourism. The presentation today is also part of the fellowship I received from the ICS. I'd like to give thanks about it and regarding the industrial heritage tourism, the landscapes of nostalgia. First of all is the one regarding the, I'd like to give a very close example, is the Detroit, city of Detroit. There is a new documentary recently about the Detropia, which is talking about the abandoned factories, rundown kind of buildings, and how to utilize these kind of like facilities and complex for the tourism purpose or to revitalize the economy. This is a very interesting kind of like, the trailers is talking about one of the interesting terms they use is ruin porn, trying to kind of like beautify these kind of like, complex and factories, buildings and things as we encountered every day. The second thing is news. I read news several weeks ago regarding the city of Toledo industrial past. It's a very interesting news about how to dismantle the smokestack. This is obviously, if you see the picture, it's halfway through. They talking about if they're going to clean it up, it needs additional $35,000, which certainly they're still looking for money to clean it up. But on the other hand, there's a lot of different voices. One of the things they're talking about is a preservation. It's an industrial past. It's a kind of a glorious time in the city of Toledo, and how to preserve that, and how to understand the value of industrial heritage. So that's why that's a two kind of like interesting things is coming down to what I call the landscapes of nostalgia. And this is the picture is actually a very interesting contrast in the skyline of Chicago. Then of course there's a one is Oriental paper factories, and kind of like side by side to reflect how importance of industrial heritage in the U.S. and for our daily life. Industrial heritage tourism, sometimes we use the NORA's, the term is the le lieu de mémoire. It means like a sites of a memory. It's pretty much what we're talking about is industrial landscapes, including industrial remains, ruins, warehouses, and factories. And also there is a so-called new space, because it's a raw space is open for resource reinterpretation. And instead also we talk a lot about the tourist gaze. That means how tourists gaze direct at the industrial heritage site in different ways. What I'm writing a book right now is about the industrial heritage. There is a one thing here I propose called the third industrial revolution, because the first industrial revolution, that's pretty much talking about machineries and heavy industries, and the second one certainly is going up to like a mass productions and kind of a commodification. The third one, what I propose is certainly is coming back, so-called kind of craftsmanship. And this one is we pay close attention to our kind of like our personal skills, and talking about how we treasure the kind of industries, kind of like a different way of a process. So that's why it turned out to be very interesting, like in the era when we talked about industrial heritage. This is the one I just give you some examples for the successful examples in industrial heritage tourism. The Iron Bridge Gorge Museum in the UK, that's supposed to be the birthplace of industrial revolution. Tate Modern in London, that's also actually converted from former power station. Distillery District in Toronto, Canada, which has turned out to be a very fancy schmancy kind of like residential areas and cafes and restaurants, and one of the top tourist destinations. Then there is a social movement happening in Japan right now. We talking about is the term is a kojo moi. It basically means it's a factory love. It's really something they want to visit the factory. They want to take a glimpse of these industrial kind of productions and machineries and all different kind of things. It's a very interesting phenomenon right now in Japan. Then of course we have so-called in Italy. There's a famous like a Fiat 500. There's a museum in Turin about the Museum of Automobiles to memorize, to celebrate the successful kind of like in the sales of Fiat. Then of course last one I think I like to emphasize is certainly is a BMW European program. This programs basically give every potential buyers 5 to 7% discount, and instead they can travel to the factories. They can see their baby cars is being assembled in front of their eyes. Then they have the keys. They can drive on the autobahn, which is no speed limit, for a couple of days. Then they return the car. They fly back, and the car will be shipped to you in a couple of weeks. So that's why it's a very interesting kind of like to distinguish what is the factory kind of a tourism or what is like a purchase of the product. Right now it becomes, for me, it's inseparable. It's a kind of like a package what we have right now. Of course, there is also facing a very interesting phenomenon is the commodification of industrial heritage tourism. This is the picture I took. Is actually a clothing, apparel, merchandising. It's on the Michigan Avenue in Chicago. This is called the All Saints Spitalfields. Basically, you will see all these old sewing machines, and the kind of like this is the display. It's to show you how the kind of a powerful of the industry and how powerful these heavy industries to attract the buyers. My presentation today is actually a focus on 3 issues. One is to demonstrate how industrial heritage tourism can be theorized from historical, cultural, social, and economic perspectives. Then, of course, I'd like to present a case study of industrial heritage tourism sites and compare the differences in approach by countries in North America, Asia, and even in New Zealand. Then, of course, I'd like to make suggestions about the future of the industrial heritage tourism research and the development. So that is the kind of the theme of the presentation. First, I'd like to kind of introduce called Theorizing Heritage, Landscape, Memory, and Identity. Well, heritage is always controversial because there are different ways how to interpret that. One of the things that I can use is a heritage transposable concept that is often disputed, yet dispute creates heritage. And there are 2 types of very broad way to define heritage is tangible versus intangible. Tangible is certainly something you can touch, you can feel that way. Intangible is more or less is reflect the community. There's a roots and there's a kind of cultural identity, that kind of things here. I'd like to introduce one theory called the rubbish theory. It was created by Thompson in 1979 through his art collection. And in this one, he talks about so-called the value of an object is rising and falling depending on the context as it ages. So that means there will be a rubbish maybe in one period of time, but over certain kind of things is the value has changed, or there's something so-called perceived scarcity of other changes of valuation that cause the prices to rise as the objects age. So that means the rubbish one day, then if several years later, that could be a very valuable kind of items. So that's why probably that can explain a lot of industrial heritage or industrial products over a different period of time. You will see some very interesting like people pursuing for vintage cars, automobiles, and even the typewriters. That's really surprised me because I remember typewriters should be already displayed in a museum, but actually right now it's vintage typewriter. The repair of vintage typewriter for like a starting $75. It's actually getting really popular. The videos actually shows you how the demand is picking up and how people wanted to hear this clattering sound when they type. And that's a kind of a change when the perception and also the change of the memory and identity. In the context of heritage, we also talk about the one issue is called undesirable heritage. This is happening typically for industrial heritage tourism and products. One of the things is industrial heritage, always sometimes called a grotesque heritage. In the Soviet eras, there are like a lot of many unit functional kind of factories and surrounded by the residential areas. That's usually we call grotesque heritage because people doesn't like it. They think it's the function-wise it's very different from what we perceive in the West. Then we also have so-called prescriptive getting, and that is something happening. For example, the concentration camps and forced labor were used to manufacture automobiles during World War II in Germany. Then, of course, we also have a repressive erasure that is happening like in communist era, like military bunkers in Eastern Europe. That time they talking about they're gonna have a second like a nuclear war and whatever situation. So many like bunkers is erected in the field, but now it's deserted. What we're gonna do? And a lot of time the residents they want to just like dismantle that. They want to forget that because it's unpleasant. This is a part of the history they do not want to inherit. So that's the kind of things that here is a heritage actually turn out to be undesirable for some part of the industrial heritage. I also emphasize on the issue of nostalgia. In nostalgia, this is the one is certainly one thing is the misrecognition of the past. Nostalgia usually coming from like a collective memory. They cause a so-called temporal distortion and also postmodern imagination. This is always kind of things I use as Strangleman's like a comments is industrial heritage is subject to kind of dehistoricizing and romanticizing imagery that characterize nostalgic treatments of a more distant but nonetheless passing ways of life. So in the nostalgic areas, we have so-called nostalgic consumers. These so-called contemporary spelunker. Spelunker certainly they describe when these like industrial heritage tourists taking a picture of these like abandoned factories, getting to the buildings, kind of like what they it's a joke. It's trying to kind of describe it's how they behave in the kind of like industrial complex. So although nostalgia plays a key role in the revival of the cultural heritage, it is inherently inauthentic because it's a temporal distortion. It is what we call it is more or less it's imagination, mainly because it uses memory that is highly unstable and unique to visitors. So in order to cater to the visitors, they try to make sure the visitor will like that, will kind of abide that kind of stories, and that turned out to be so-called a different version of the so-called authenticity in the heritage interpretation. History of industrial heritage tourism. There is one thing here is like what I can find out is actually the World's Fairs in the late 19th centuries. The starting point is Crystal Palace in 1851. That's a kind of like introducing Great Britain to the industrial stage and the powerfulness. And then of course in the U.S. is 1893, the Chicago Columbian Exposition. That's still is showing that the American century is coming. In the literature-wise, what I can find out is actually the term was created first is in 1982 by Industrie Quebec, which is in French word is trying to explain so-called industry tourism. Then of course in 1986, what I find out is in the German Soviet is created a German word is trying to kind of combine industry and tourism together. So the concept is not like it's fairly new. I mean, to some extent, you're talking about starting like in early 80s. Then, of course, there's a book in 1992 published by Alfred and Putman as the Industrial Heritage Managing Resources and Uses. It is the first time to imply or suggest some parts of recreation industrial heritage can be used for recreational purpose or even for tourism. So that is how the history kind of like goes from. Then the definition of industrial heritage tourism also is controversial. First, there's so many different terms: industrial tourism, factory visits, company tours, industrial archaeology. There's even terms said, okay, industrial tourism versus industrial heritage tourism. The difference is the previous one is still functioning, while industrial heritage tourism means it's non-functioning. But I do not believe that is the right kind of like interpretation, because I find that some of the technology advancement, some of the brands, for example, Kodak, that used to be Kodak moment to describe the smiling camera sophistication, but now Kodak is filed bankruptcy. So the Kodak used to be the kind of like the edge of the technology, but now it's turned out to be in the museums. Same thing for Nokia. I mean, that's like, it used to be my first cell phone, but now I think it's purchased by Microsoft, and I even don't know what is the future for this kind of a cell phone. So that is what I call is industrial heritage tourism. It needs to be broadened the concept. So what I hear is I propose one first thing is I believe industrial heritage represents and preserves the historical, technological, social, scientific, and architectural values of industrial traditions. I think the purpose to revitalize rust belts, improve regions' image, and counteract public prejudice, and enhance the economic development, and even raise the tourist profile of the cities and regions. So that's the situation, I think, just like I mentioned about the Nokia and I mentioned about Kodak. I believe the vicissitude of the industrial transformation in recent decades are too rapid and ephemeral and apt for vacillate operating and non-operating to distinguish between industry and industrial heritage. So there is issues here also transforming industrial heritage to the core attraction of tourism and revalue, modify the essence of industrial heritage to create the passage of experiencing the traditions and to satisfy the recreational needs of the tourist. So therefore, my definition here is industrial heritage means is industrial sites, both functional or no longer functional, partake in tourism by offering the kind of a coherent and commodifiable image that is necessary to produce the tourist experience. Challenges of industrial heritage tourism. In this part is certainly one of the things that's public awareness, and I can show you my case study of the city of Toledo. There's actually a very low awareness of the industrial heritage and the values for the tourism development. And the second thing is a lack of economic measures. There isn't any clear cut like how much money generated through tourism, industrial heritage tourism, and how many people get employed in this field. And also there's a lot of controversy. Said, okay, you shut down the factories for 5,000, lay off 5,000 workers, you only hire maybe 20 back to run the souvenir shops, whether or not it makes economic sense for this kind of tourism activities. Then of course there's spatial and regional complexities, and we talk a lot about different regions have different approach, different way how they understand the industrial heritage. I propose this conceptual framework. This system one is actually, you will see I'm using the so-called circular pattern. Is trying to understand the two different interrelationships between different like attributes and motives. I listed motives here is the conservation, space, community, and image. They are actually interrelated with each other. But then in each motives, I try to find out so-called attributes for each motives. Here, if you check this diagram, you will see the first one is conservation. Conservation is actually being influenced by two major issues. One is the potentials, whether or not the place is potential to develop feasibility studies. Then the second one is the stakeholders. We need to identify these players behind the industrial heritage tourism and the conservation. Then the space-wise this is a spaces. I always said it's a raw space that needs to be so-called adaptive reuse, and how to do that. Then the community-wise, I have to point out two things. One is authenticity and economics. And the last one is the image, and this image is I'm trying to emphasize on the so-called the concept of perceptions. So I will do is in the following slides, I will give very brief to kind of give it like quick introduction of that one. In the meantime, I'd like to also propose this one so-called a process of industrial heritage tourism. This one is industrial heritage tourism is trying to do, it's a life cycle kind of like approach. Trying to do, starting with the first one is a so-called territorialization. This is starting with the so-called cultural wasteland. So it's a kind of open, raw space waiting to be developed. And then, of course, the second stage is we call it re-territorialization. And re-territorialization, oh no, I'm sorry, it's a deterritorialization, the second one. And deterritorialization is actually the tourism, regeneration, urban renewals that kick in. And this one is trying to kind of like change the territorial identities and trying to make it something new for tourists and for commercial purpose. And the last one, certainly, that's what we call the re-territorialization. In this one, re-territorialization means it's a creative industry. Maybe the original identity has already been changed, a new identity has been created, and a new form of the tourism. Sometimes we call it a destructive development, or what we do is trying to kind of like have a new image for the industrial site. Conservation, this is one, just go back to the conceptual framework I had. Conservation one is certainly potential is trying to do is for planning purpose, we do so-called triage. Is industrial triage is trying to understand like, what is the differences, like, whether or not the place can be developed, because not every place can be developed. Some places like heavily polluted, needs to be cleaned up. Some places just like, probably never ever had a chance to turn that into tourism resources. So we need to access the characteristics of the industrial areas. And then of course there's stakeholders. And the stakeholders is what we have is trying to identify these key players, business leaders, planners, sponsors, etc., etc. Space-wise, I already talking about one of the key success for industrial heritage tourism development is called adaptive reuse. Recycle for the new uses and tourism attractions. You will see some places converted into cafes, restaurants, even like fancy like shopping malls and the residential areas. These all can be seen as adaptive reuse for different purpose. Then community-wise, what I'm talking about is one of the key issues for community is economic success. We need to take advantage of historical characters, ambience, and a sense of place to have so-called creative economy. One of the things is we talk a lot about authenticity, whether or not that the thing is authentic. I think the key issues is opposite of the generic. So, or Latin words we call it genius loci. It's trying to find out the spirit of the place. Image, that's always a thing here. We need to have so-called common community perception. Whether or not this is a good thing or bad thing, we need to have a perception of how to kind of overcome these kind of negativities, how to make sure we can promote industrial heritage in this community. In the following slides, I'd like to do is to give you a couple of examples, case studies. The first one is a proposed Jeep museum in Toledo, Ohio. It's actually very close to Bowling Green. It's about like a 20 minutes drive northbound. This is the one everyone probably realized. Jeep is the Toledo is the birthplace of the Jeep. First Jeep was manufactured in Toledo. So there's a history about the Wiley's Overland, and also we're talking about the most prosperous city in 1960s because the success of the sales of the Jeep. Then, of course, after 1960s and 70s, there is a so-called mergers between Daimler Chrysler. Or the first it was purchased by Chrysler, and then Chrysler had some issues, and eventually, I think 90s and 2000, it was merged with the Daimler Chrysler together. So that's the things is here is coming like so-called a downhill, like a decline, economic kind of a downturn. And there's a lot of comments. One time said that Toledo is like a smile that is missing a lot of teeth. And that's how they describe the current situation: population loss, economic downturn. So there is so-called proposed National Jeep Museum time for grassroots. The purpose to so-called urban regeneration. They want to use the museum to rejuvenate the city economy and to attract more tourists, to change the city image, and also to improve the economic situation. The methodologies I'm using, the first one is I in-depth interviewed the stakeholders in the different fields, trying to ascertain what they think about this field, the development of Jeep Museum, and what kind of problems, what kind of things as we do. Then the second thing is certainly the examination of historical documents in the past years. And then also I conducted telephone interview that was happening in 2006 and 2007, trying to gauge the perception from the community whether or not the development is a feasible plan. The results shows the first is huge potential and conflict of view from the stakeholders. The second thing is controversial reuse and ill-informed economic impact. And of course, the last one is slippery authenticity and poor perception. In a huge potential and conflict of view from the stakeholders, and this is the one first, is everyone realized Jeep is good. Using Jeep for tourism product as a tourism development is hell of a good idea. But on the other hand, there's a lot of concern and different views from stakeholders. One thing is here is that there are a lot of arguments that, okay, because Jeep belongs to Daimler Chrysler, Daimler Chrysler should invest the money for this kind of a museum. It needs a strong support. And the second thing is regarding the so-called authentic preparation for the museum. Where is the location? Should we build the Jeep museum next to the factories, or should we kind of like find a new destination? That's the one. And of course, also there's a lot of debates regarding the local participation, whether or not we can mobilize locals to participate to support this kind of a plan. Controversial reuse and ill-informed economic impact, and this one is basically the building of a museum for conservation and interpretation. There's a lot of debates what we need to focus on. People use the successful examples from the Cleveland Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Without Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Cleveland probably never ever become like a major tourist destination, and the museum does attract a lot of people from all over the countries. So then, of course, they also talked about manipulation of urban landscape to satisfy visitors' expectation. And one of the things they're talking about, because the previous the Jeep factories actually is not located in downtown, and to revitalize downtown, we need to have the museum in downtown, which is that time they proposed to have that in the abandoned hospital. But then there is a controversy here is that whether or not it's truly authentic, also called a Jeep museum, because the real museum is not, it's far away. So that is a lot of a kind of like a debate regarding locational choices, and also what kind of like economic impacts will we have for this kind of museum. Then, of course, the slippery authenticity and poor perception. A lot of time people think that like a Jeep is already a generic product. You know, Jeep is just not an automobile. It has like everything, products, I mean, all different merchandising. So whether or not it's like to understand a Jeep, that takes a lot of time. Then, of course, there's a poor community perception. That's really discouraging things, because my telephone interview shows Jeep, when we asked the respondents to rank the most important resources for tourism development in Toledo, Jeep is not even on the top 5 list. So they identified the Maumee River, they identified a different glass, but they don't think it's like a Jeep. For a lot of people, Jeep factory just like, you know, make a living, make ends meet, and that's how they feel about. So that's also the perceptual problem when we develop that. So research implication for this case study is certainly, first is I like to increase the public awareness to make sure there's like, you know, overcome the stereotypical kind of image of like, you know, Jeep industrial heritage. The second thing is I think we need a strong government support to implement the Jeep Museum, and especially we need to encourage public and private partnership, and I think without these partnership one can never move forward for this kind of like a grand project. My second case study is a move to far away from the US. It's actually come to the Taiwan, which is one time is very well known for salt and sugar kind of productions. And this is the picture I took when I collect data on the field. There are a lot of so-called salt heritage tourism, or salt field was abandoned, but now it's turned that into kind of a tourist attractions, mostly for educational purpose, but increasingly there are more and more people interested in understand the cultural heritage and the product, what they want. Briefly, salt heritage tourism in Taiwan is located in the southwestern region in Taiwan, and it used to be dominated by salt. Then, of course, the significance of salt production to the locals' livelihood for the kind of so-called cultural landscape If you have a chance to travel there, you'll notice there's a lot of like a salt field. That time is the kind of like the means of economic development. And also what they use, the methods, is so-called solar evaporation method. It's basically a very natural process. Leave the water and let it kind of like evaporate, eventually turn that like a thin layer of a salt. And that's how the sea salt comes from. They have a so-called, we identify things, is one is we identify theme, program, and a design. In the context of themes, what I did is trying to understand what is a production process, and for example, how to understand the solar evaporation methods in different stages. Then the second is products, and trying to understand, like, say, what type of the products being used, like for what type of souvenirs. And the programs is we're trying to do is understand the participatory experience, how tourists interested in participate, understand the hands-on experience, and what type of like interpretive assistance we provide to help tourists understand the significance of soul tourism. Then of course we pay attention to the design, whether it's a modern design or like a nostalgic design, which means very traditional. Methodology we use is we actually did in the rest area along the highway for a lot of respondents, just randomly assigned to one of the experimental groups. We asked to fill out questionnaires regarding the perceived experience in the themes, programs, and designs, and perceived attractiveness and social demographic informations. 440 respondents participated, and 412 turned out to be a valid kind of answers where we can do some findings. The finding shows it's very interesting. First is participatory experience was ranked the highest. So they basically think it's very important to have so-called hands-on experience, to go to the field, to experience that kind of like, salt production process. So it provides so-called fun and memorable experience for tourists. Then the second thing is both nostalgic and modern decor perceived as major attractions for soul tourism. They like both. They think both are very important. However, the interesting finding here is that tourists want certain aspect experience to be signal traditionalism, while they like souvenir product to be rather modern. So they want, for example, the pavilion, the exhibition to be very traditional, something go back to like the 1930s, 1920s. But on the other hand, when they want to purchase souvenirs, they want something very cute, modern, fashionable, so that they can give it to your friends and relatives. So it's a very kind of a different kind of perception when they do the purchasing versus when they kind of experiencing the kind of heritage tourism. Now I back to kind of like in Ohio again, and this is the one, certainly the third case studies. What I introduced is real tourism, and real tourism is very important, as a matter of fact, for the state of Ohio. The data I read is real tourism, a huge part of Ohio tourism niche, and accounts about 6% of tourism dollars in the state, and that's the kind of a number. And real tourism includes short train rides, railroad park observations, museum visitations, and special events such as real fairs, festivals, and days, and that kind of things as special events. And real tourism also provides potential economic benefits for these towns as a means of a business and heritage identity. Real tourism, this is the picture I took actually, it's not far from Bowling Green. It's Dashler, Ohio. It's a small town, but it was ranked as a top 10 real tourism destination by Wall Street journals. Basically, it has so-called a diamond-shaped rail cross. It's also, I think, two major railway will cross each other in Dashler. One, I think, for north-south, one is from east and west. And this is like so-called Crossroads Park. It's a very simple. It's just you have chairs, you can sit there, you can have a barbecue, you can observe the train passing through. Very close. This is, of course, the train, how it goes, very close, right in front of your eyes. And there's some problems for the real tourism research. The first is little research has been done to examine the profile of the real enthusiasts. Economic impact of real tourism on the local community have been ignored. And I one time dining the restaurant in Dashler, I asked the waitress, said, okay, can you tell me where's the kind of like a real tourism destination in this town? And she looked at me just like didn't understand what I'm talking about. So many towns neglect the potential of using railroads as a tourism resource to revive the economy, and that's the key problem. This is just like a kind of a bulletin board. You will see this like a kind of like a news and kind of like an information, even a calendar to show you how to do that. And also there's a speaker, which is you can talk to each other, like in which it will be the next train, what is the model number, and where it come from. It's a very interactive to some extent, but on the other hand, it's a very primitive, and that's the interesting thing. So research objectives is to identify problems and prospects of rail tourism, economic impacts of rail tourism relationship to economic expenditures, how much money people spend to observe the trains, and understand the profile of these rail tourists. I mean, who are they? So this is just like a list very quickly, so-called rail tourism attractions. And what I have is like there's a scenic railroads and railroad observation parks. Then we have so-called railway organizations for travel and tourism, and rail excursion companies, and even like a railway museums. We will have quite a few. Like actually, this is listed. It's all like along Lake Erie, in Toledo and Cleveland areas. Case studies, what I did is I already mentioned is that Ohio has the highest number of public highway crossings of train tracks in the U.S. due to its flat geography. And the second is everyone in Ohio is approximately within 10 miles of a railroad track. 10 miles. And Dasher, I already talking about top 10 for rail enthusiasm in 2007. And the reason is like a very nostalgic kind of like feelings with a city park, diamond-shaped crossing, and too busy like a CSX railroad tracks with some picnic facilities, speakers to broadcast the track controllers' conversations. Very interesting kind of a place to do the rail tourism. And this is the diamond-shaped crossing, which is a picture I can show you. Methodology, what I use is actually a survey the infrastructure first, using the Daschler as a case study, understand the facilities and the kind of quality of the railway, availability of the observation area, the quality of the museum, and the nearby hotels and restaurants, whether or not we have enough infrastructure to support that kind of like activities. Then we also conduct interviews with rail enthusiasts to gauge their demographics and expenditure of travel so that we can gauge the potential economic benefits of the site and the local communities. This is, of course, the picture, the other side of the crossroads and how you observe that. But then the findings, at this point, I interviewed about 36 interviewees in different areas. I think the first thing is poor perception of using railway for tourism. As I mentioned about the waitress reaction, and also the whole community, they understand the railroad, but they don't feel that's kind of like as a revenue for tourism and the resources for for any kind of a development. For these tourists or real enthusiasts, they usually the age is running 35 to 55 years old, and average education attainment, they got undergrad, some got like high school, males majority, and the average incomes is running from 35,000 to 55,000, and that's the range. So interesting in rails is actually brought up by the influence of family and friends, and that's a very interesting. Most of the time the answer you is because I'm interested in railways, because my grandfather or my father is interested in that. I was brought up and I understand very well these mechanics and things like that. So it's a very full of nostalgia. It's a very kind of something in the past generations. And of course, they have also called selective memories. They think the railway is great. It's a lot of functions can be used, not just for for carrying goods. They also can be seen as a very important source of tourism development. Of course, I also seek some constructive suggestion for future development. How could we improve that? Where's the money from? Whether or not we can kind of make it this kind of observation deck even better to attract more tourists. And that's the kind of preliminary findings I have. I think it's a rail tourism is research implication wise. I think it's a niche market in the U.S. I think it will need a lot of marketing and promotion, and also I find most of the time it's a word of mouth. It's not like going through the TVs and whatever. These people actually they have their own intranet. They know each other, and then of course the revitalization of railway is seeming very important, and understand also the profile of these people who actively pursuing rail tourism. I use the French words. This is the one is like say okay, trying to understand. It's like to understand the memory of the past seems to predominate over the present, and that's actually I use that also in the end, trying to kind of emphasize the importance of the industrial heritage tourism. The last one, my case study, certainly moves again far away from the U.S. is to New Zealand. In this one is I talking about waterfront redevelopment. And I think in recent decades, there's numerous waterfronts have undergone a reorientation from brownfields to commercial, residential, and recreational areas. And some successful things is we have in Docklands in London, Canary Wharf, and the Baltimore waterfront in the U.S., and Tokyo waterfront city, they call it Odaiba, and also they have some successful riverfront development in Thailand and Singapore. This is the panoramic view of Auckland, New Zealand. It's a beautiful city. It's close to water. Waterfront is becoming very, very important actually for industries and also for any kind of like a development. This is the scope of Auckland waterfront. This is like a short video I took from my cell phone, and you can pretty much have a kind of like a glimpse of the scope, the magnitude of waterfront. It's actually Auckland is surrounded by waters, and that's a very important. The first impression is the waterfront. The problems of waterfront issues, the first is a lack of a morphological analysis. So the second thing is the relationship between tourism development, how to understand the tourism development to change, to redevelop the waterfront, then the public participation and also socioeconomic impact of waterfront redevelopment. Heritage components in New Zealand, in Auckland, is basically industrial heritage because waterfronts are being used and are still used as a major port function for warehouse, for kind of auto industries and whatever. Then the second is maritime heritage. There's a lot of like in New Zealand, Auckland has been called the city of sails. And also these important two major events, America's Cup and World Rugby Cup, is actually reshape waterfront development. Methodology, what I use, one is a review of the documents, starting from like 50, 100 years ago to see how to change the morphological process development in the waterfront. The second thing is a field works, and we also plot new maps, trying to understand the process in different stage. This is the picture of the commercial waterfront in this area. You will see this started with the on the right side. This started with the King's Wharf, then moved to Queen's Wharf, then Princess Wharf, then till the last stage right now is a viaduct and the Wynyard Point. Of course, this is surrounded by the Waitemata harbors. This is kind of how it goes. So the stage-wise is like a developmental, starting with the first is King's Wharf, then after that it moved to kind of a Queen's Wharf, then from that to the Princess Viaduct is a major issues because the viaduct is influenced heavily by the special events like American Cups and the rugby. Then of course the new development zone right now is a move to Wynyard, and that is the kind of a newly developed kind of like areas. In this picture, this one is I like to show you actually it's a morphological development starting like at 1866, very primitive. That stage is pretty much like you will see the waterfront is very tiny, small. Then moved to 1895, that turned out to be expanded, given more investment. Then it reached 1925. This is the one is you will see it's a line of new development because of the railway station, and there is like a traffic and all different kind of transportation modes in this area. Then of course in 1950s around, that is the major development areas, is because not only the wharves but also it's expanded quickly to the neighboring areas. And then late 20th centuries, you will see it's actually Wynyard Wharf and this area is in the left side, and that's been the focus for the development. Working port, as I said, okay, that's a very important industrial heritage because this is still functioning in the waterfront. That's the picture you will see. They actually imported a lot of Japanese cars from Japan. That is the working part what we have here. Then, of course, there's some initial stage of redevelopment. In this one is a redevelopment stage. Is certainly you will see that's like starting with a very early, like Queens, Kings, then a kind of move forward to neighboring kind of places. But this is just one part of that, and of course there's some commercial recreational use. And this is the ones here is like in the city of sales, and they use as like a commercial. You can rent a boat. They can kind of take you far away. So everything is centered on the waterfront. Wynyard Quarter, this is a brand new. They used to be sealed off from public. They do not. It's a factory. It's like a cement factory place. You will see this is the picture shows you. It's still kind of like a mix with a factories complex and the things is a railroad. This is the one just different side of the history of Team New Zealand in America's Cup, and this is show you how like in a different kind of a revitalization stage has been developed. This is the picture I just want to show you. There's a kind of like a big giant, like a smokestack. It's actually a cement for the combination of a governmental intervention and the developers. And this is the one here. I think it's quite important. If you take a look at it, it's supported by government and also pushed by the real estate developers. They want to turn that into high-end residential areas, condos. So you have a view of the kind of like waterfront, and that kind of things is always the push behind. But then you will see also it's a mixed use approach, because here at one hand you will see it's like there's still a working port. On the other hand, you will see there's a line of a slew of restaurants and cafes along. Then if this pictures I took is actually show you the kind of like a mixed, how mixed. And then far away, it's a silo park. It's basically it's still a factories kind of a complex. I mean abandoned. Of course, they're going to convert that. So this is kind of like a mixed everything together along the waterfront. This is how we talk about a mixed use approach. Research implication for this one is certainly is directing morphology towards understanding physical and socioeconomic impacts of major factors which have influenced the revitalization of a waterfront in Auckland. There are so-called governance structures, and you will see there's different levels trying to promote waterfront redevelopment. Then, of course, the process having inevitably diluted the significance of industrial heritage and maritime histories, and created a new meanings. And what's the new meanings? Basically, redevelopment becomes a commodity traded by governments and real estate developers. And especially in Wynyard Quarters, that's the last part of that. I do not see a lot of public participation or involvement in the decision-making process. And that means it's more or less is kind of like decided by the real estate developer, and that's certainly a challenge for the future, whether or not we need to include industrial heritage as a key component, or whether or not we just use the waterfront for commercial purpose solely. This is the conclusion, I think, for these case studies, the 3 case studies, and trying to kind of, first thing is I argue, as at the beginning, we're talking about the differences between industrial tourism versus industrial heritage tourism, and I believe industrial heritage should be viewed as a living heritage for tourism. It's evolving, it's fluid, it's constantly changing. And second thing I think important is a partnership towards common goals. In the case studies of Toledo, you will see, because there isn't any so-called public-private partnership, and that's why the proposal failed eventually. So we need to have so-called set a common goal so we can work together. And then the production of a mixed-use spaces. This is when we talk a lot about, like you say, okay, waterfront redevelopment in Auckland, and we also talk some places, for example, in Taiwan and in some other places. I don't see industrial heritage tourism can be solely just developed for the heritage purpose. You got to have some different, like restaurants and cafes and cinemas and shopping malls, whatever. There's a mixed use is probably the best way to succeed. And then, of course, understanding tourist segmentation. There are different parts of segmentation. For real tourism, this is especially important. We want to know who are these people, how much money they're willing to spend, why they want to come here to Dazzler to observe the trains. And of course, the last one is the growth of industrial heritage tourism as an academic discipline. And I think this is probably very important. I hope just like a cultural tourism, heritage tourism, eventually I think industrial heritage tourism should find its niche. It's disciplinary field, and it needs a lot of academic attention. I conclude that is, of course, the last one is the French words terrain vague. It's basically said it's wasteland. Its meaning here is a Spanish architect Ignacio once time to talk about the industrial heritage tourism. He believes is industrial heritage tourism constantly serve to remind people of the way in which the memory of the past seems to predominate over the present, and that's probably captured the essence of this research and how we understand the future development of the industrial heritage tourism. So thank you very much for listening, and that's my presentation.